All right, so as we heard earlier on there, we have a special guest all the way out of Canada, the Queen of Pot, you say?
Canadian. Queen of Canadian Pot.
The Queen of Canadian Pot.
Yes.
Correct, yes. So you want to make sure I'm putting the Canadian part in there?
Yes, of course, because there are different queens in different countries, eh?
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Well, you know what? Let me welcome Her Majesty to our program this evening. It's a pleasure to have you on our program. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
All right. Now, when they call you, my name is Sonny Bling. It's a pleasure to have a conversation with you. And when they say you're the Queen of Canadian Pot, can you break that down for us, please? What does that mean to you?
Well, it's a very nice, high honor to receive, and it's probably based on the fact that my former husband, Mark Emery, was known worldwide as the Prince of Pot. So I would get called the Princess of Pot or the Queen of Pot. He gets called the King of Pot. We might have a lot of history to lay claim to those names, perhaps, but I think it's a little bit silly. It's a little bit fun, kind of like cannabis itself.
Okay. Now, you're the owner and operator of Cannabis Culture Magazine, Cannabis Culture Lounges, the Pot TV Network, as well as Jody's Joint. All right, now you've been an activist since 2004, so we want to hear some words from you in different corners, different aspects. Of course, I'm going to turn over to the guys now. Let Joshua toss some questions your way. So thank you so much for being on the program. How's the weather right now for you?
Oh, it's beautiful, actually. We're pretty lucky right now here in Vancouver on the West Coast. We've got some good sunshine, so flowers are blooming. It's pretty awesome right now.
Nice, man. Thanks for sharing that with us here. Joshua, let's get into it.
Yes, Jody, Canada is, of course, one of the leading countries in the global cannabis industry. I just wanted to get your view of how things are in the Canadian cannabis industry right now and that evolution you'd have seen over the last few years from your perspective, your vantage point.
Well, it's very interesting. It's a mixed bag, you could say. There are pros and cons. The good part is everyone around the world says Canada legalized marijuana. Let's do it here. So it's a positive example to set for other countries. The negative is that I'm concerned, and many others are concerned, that legalization here has turned into a corporatization of cannabis. It's really a new form of prohibition in many ways. So on the surface level, sounds awesome. It's true, there are a lot fewer arrests for cannabis possession, but there are still a lot of tough laws. They even increased the punishments and penalties in Canada. It was done in a way almost to keep the existing cannabis industry illegal and create a new industry run by big corporations. And many of the people involved in those corporations used to be police officers and government officials who fought against legalization. So I have a big list of those people on my Twitter profile online. It's got a lot of names of people who I would say are hypocrites. And unfortunately, they have come in and made billions of dollars themselves, while people who are legacy or activist grassroots folks, they're still getting arrested, they're still being charged, and they're still going to court. So my concern about the Canadian model of legalization is that the big executives in the companies here in Canada have gone around the world and are trying to get other countries to copy this model where the original cannabis industry does not get to be legalized, and where a big corporate model comes in and tries to take over the industry. That's a concern, I think, a lot of people worldwide, from Africa to Germany to everywhere in between. We're all worried about the corporatization of cannabis when there's a culture of cannabis and a history of cannabis that needs to be respected and protected.
Jody, hi, Derek Archon here, just joined the team this evening. I've never been to Canada, but we've always heard about BC Bud being the premium standard. I've studied in England. I had friends from Canada, and when they saw this stuff in England at the time, 10, 15 years ago, they were like, no, in Canada, this would not even fly. But my question is that with legalization in Canada, a regulated industry, Is it a situation where what is being sold in the dispensary is of a higher quality, or is it still the garage and backyard and basement growers, still have the stuff that the actual connoisseurs or actual long-time, users really want?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's hard to say because for many, many years before legalization, all of the weed was illegal. And sometimes you would find good growers, sometimes you would find bad growers. The issue with prohibition and criminalization is that when the government says we're going to punish you if you use cannabis or grow it, that means that most people will say, oh, maybe I won't grow it. I don't want to get punished. But you get perhaps organized crime or gangs might then get involved and say, we don't care. We're not scared. And if you're going to increase the risk, you're only making it more valuable. So we'll step in and we'll grow it, but we'll do a really bad job. Like, we don't care about the consumers. We don't care about the culture. We care about money, and government laws make cannabis worth money. So let's do the cannabis thing. So when the government says gangs get involved, it's because of their own laws. But the majority of growers in Canada, proven through the Justice Department, the majority are peaceful, nonviolent people, just regular Canadians who grow a plant that they love. So dispensaries that came about before legalization, they would often self-regulate. They would meet the growers and say, hey, you're doing a great job or you're not doing a great job. And they could refuse the bad weed and get the good weed. But when the government legalized in Canada in 2018, all of those growers remained illegal, regardless of whether they were good or bad. And the government licensed giant corporate farms, or you could call it factory farms, for weed. The problem with those big models is that they had a lot of problems in the news about being moldy or contaminated. People were getting sick. There were class action lawsuits. So there's a big history of the legal cannabis actually being unsafe and dangerous. But the government is saying, no, only legal weed is safe. So make sure you only buy legal so we get our cut from the finances. It's a little bit unfair because on the legal side, it started with big corporate farms, but now there are smaller producers that are getting legal. They're getting licensed. The issue is it's extremely expensive and prohibitive to get into that industry. And we're seeing that around the world, that these small farms, the local mom and pops, they would love to get legal and licensed so that they don't get punished by the law. But the government says you need $1 million to start. And not many people have that. That's a very high bar. So you have legal weed today that's bad and cheap, or good and high quality. I'm concerned that the prices are still too high. They're prohibition prices. Cannabis is a weed. It grows wild and free. The human population on Earth, we've been cultivating it for hundreds and thousands of years for medical, spiritual, and recreational purposes. So you're going to get good and bad weed like you get good and bad food out of home kitchens and corporate kitchens. You just have to stop punishing people with the law and allow the smaller artisan growers to get a step ahead. It's just very difficult when big corporate cannabis has all the money, the lobbying power, and in many cases, those companies are run by former government officials and law enforcement officials. So the small-time grower needs to be protected when cannabis is legalized in Canada and everywhere. We still have a lot of work to do.
Jody, this is Otto here. Just as you know, listening to what you just said, I mean, it sort of piqued my interest in the sense of what does the Caribbean do? Because we are seeing the same type of behavior where we're seeing the big pharma, the big companies, you know, are looking at coming in, and we have seen it in places like Jamaica. We have seen it in places like St. Vincent, where you have the international, which is good for the economics. But what for me is my concern is those who may have been doing it under persecution are now left out of the equation and still may have to function with some level of illegality. But what would you say from your perspective as an advice for the listeners here? Because we have listeners not just in Trinidad but in the region, people who may be interested in getting licenses to do different parts of the cannabis industry. What advice you would give to them, you know, from seeing that where Canada is so advanced and you have been involved in the industry since it was legalized or in certain parts of Canada?
Well, I would say you must defend the small growers. You must defend the cultural heritage. We saw in Jamaica, for example, that they are obviously, we all know Jamaica is associated with the marijuana culture. I love it there myself. It's a beautiful place. But what happens is when the licensing is only given to a few people, that does prevent, obviously, the smaller growers from getting into that industry. And, maybe the big growers can handle all the production, but it's still not quite fair, because the difference between Canada and the Caribbean, for example, is that we don't really have any indigenous cannabis here. We've grown hemp historically, but cannabis comes from near the equator around the world, from the sativa to the indica. We know that many countries around the world, cannabis is part of their heritage. It's part of their culture. It's in their lifeblood. And that makes it even more offensive that a big corporation from North America would go there and say, we get to grow it, you don't. Buy our weed, pay taxes, and those taxes will be used to keep punishing you and excluding you. That's nonsense. That's not fair. That's unjust. So my advice would be to very seriously defend your community and culture there. It could be done in the framework of how the entire world, even though we're becoming more global and interconnected, there's a strong push for decentralization, whether it comes to food production or energy production or producing your own clothing and livestock and farming. I think you can make the argument that factory farm cattle or plants or anything is less of a quality. It's got less authenticity, and people should be moving away from that. They should be trying to grow their food locally, grow their ganja locally, make their clothing locally. So the argument could be pushed that business is good. We are not against business. We're not against money and economic growth. We need that. But if the money and the economic growth is only in the hands of a few corporate people or government, everyone else is excluded. And then what happens is that not only do you deny the right to grow to the smaller farmers, but there's also a suppression of the cultural benefits that could turn into economic benefits, meaning tourism, lounges, all the cultural associations through festivals and concerts. There are so many things related to cannabis that could be celebrated and explored and expanded on. But when the government says marijuana is okay for us to handle, but not for you, it's still a form of prohibition. And in that way, they prohibit the culture and the community and the growth and the spirit of cannabis that is so integral in the plant. It's about bringing people together and about freedom of the mind and body. It's not about restrictions and limitations and prohibitions. So the best way to do it is just to insist that as human beings and as a culture, you have the right to defend a plant that gives more benefits than causes harm. It's a tough battle, though. We know through big corporations, they go all over the world. They destroy indigenous communities and steal their land and resources. And that's a big problem. It's hard to push back against that. But you can appeal to the hearts of the people. And hopefully, if there's any heart in a corporation, you can appeal to them that it benefits everyone to allow all to participate, to have fairness, inclusion, equality. That matters. Otherwise, you're just getting a new form of prohibition where the government corporate mobsters sell all the weed and everyone else goes to jail. That's not fair. That's not right. And that's not what legalization should be.
Loving this conversation so far. We want to stick up in it right there and take a quick commercial break. We're going to return in about 2 minutes time, Jody. So thank you very much for being a part of the program. We really enjoy your input this afternoon or this evening with us. Of course, guys, on the panel as well, you'll stay tuned for some more. This is Height. Remember, you can give us a call at 624-1005-623-5001. We're also live on Freedom 106.5 FM. And you can also send us a WhatsApp at 707-SLAM.
Slam 100.5 FM, Freedom 106.5, and the hosts of this program do not advocate the sale, distribution, or transportation of cannabis, especially for persons under the age of 18.
Hey, on Slam 100.5 and Freedom 106.5 FM. back to our program. This is Heights Where Knowledge Grows, of course. We're inside our Royal segment brought to you with the kind compliments of our sponsors, Royal Extra Stout. Live on Slam on 0.5 and Freedom 106.5 FM. We're speaking with the Canadian Queen of Cannabis. Guys, take it away.
So, Jody, you were saying a little earlier that with because right now Trinidad is in a situation where we are waiting our authority to be established and the regulations that will go with it with medical use in Trinidad. But you were saying earlier that prices, in terms of prices, that sometimes with the legal market, prices are more than how it was before with the black market.
Definitely a problem in Canada, and even worse, the government decides, there's billions of dollars in that industry. Why don't we take that money? So almost half of all the money from Canadian legal growers is going in tax to the government. They can't even afford to pay it. Many of those companies are defaulting. It's a big crisis when the government comes in and says, let's keep the prices high so we can all make a lot of money. That's not the right way to go. There should not be prohibition-based prices in a legal industry. They need to make it more viable. They don't need to flood the market with weed. But what boggles my mind is the weed is already there. The cannabis already exists. It's when we say legalize it, we're talking about the cannabis that's already growing. You don't need to create a whole new industry. So when they up the prices and they increase the regulations and the cost of licensing, it's just a new form of prohibition. We need to get rid of that. And I've seen that in Trinidad and Tobago, you have the Cannabis Control Authority waiting to be created. I think it's 4 years now since it was supposed to launch. I think there's an activist actually going and doing a protest about this because they're saying it's ridiculous. We're still waiting this long for some approval, and we have to make sure that the cost of getting legal is accessible. That's a huge, important step. So I'm glad to see there's some activism still going on, and it's a lot easier to try and at least take step by step to fix things when they're wrong. But if you can come in at first with really good policy, that's much better than trying to chip away at bad policies after the fact, like we're doing here in Canada. But step by step, you take what you can get and you always ask for more.
And Jody, I know you as an advocate, you are well aware of these dynamics that are quote unquote behind the scene. But do you get the impression that the average consumer is aware of some of these issues, that the big corporate companies are dominating and pulling and drowning out the small time growers, or are they just content to be smoking legal weed at this time and caught up in that sense of euphoria?
That's a bit of a tragedy, I think, here in Canada, is that for many years, and in the United States, for that example, they legalized first in Washington and Colorado. But what happened is the language became a problem. For many decades, activists said, legalize cannabis, legalization march around the world. A lot of it was focused on we need to legalize it. And then the question came, okay, well, how? How do you legalize it? And that became very difficult because suddenly people had different ideas. And instead of being in one direction of just a concept, we needed to come up with the devil in the details. And that started to create divisions. Some people said you have to hold out for the best laws you can get. And some people said, take what you can get. Like anything is better than nothing. It's just been challenging here, I think, because the Canadian public says it's legal, done, wipe your hands clean, we're finished, good job, everybody. And people say that to me a lot too. They say, thank you, Jody, you did great work, it's legal, you must be so happy. And I am happy in some ways. Again, the message of legalization leaves Canada and inspires the rest of the world. But I'm a little sad because there are so many issues. Medical cannabis access is being eliminated in Canada. Medical dispensaries are not legal. We have advocates who open medical dispensaries, and they're getting arrested and charged and going to court. And before, the punishment was 7 years maximum for cannabis crimes. Now it's 14. They doubled the punishments, even though they said it was being legalized. So it's a very strange thing to have the mental idea and the public at large saying we legalized it. And yet there are people like me and others who are saying, hey, there are a lot of problems. You're not allowed to advertise it. You're not allowed to have lounges. You're not allowed medical stores. People are still being fired from their jobs and refused housing because of cannabis. There's still a stigma. There are still prohibitions. But that's a difficult thing to say when everybody wants to just celebrate the positives. So it's a strange dance to be in the middle of that, where you celebrate the good and yet you have to point out the bad. And I don't want to be accused of saying, I told you so, or complaining all the time. But you can't fix something if you don't say it's broken. If you don't point out the problems, how are you going to repair them? So it is interesting that the word legalization has changed, and people are just accepting that the work is done when it's not. So it's hard to keep the focus on that. You know, a lot of Canadians, even myself, you could just go to a weed store anywhere. There are stores all over. They have a lot of product. It's accessible and normal, but in a way, it's kind of boring because the government took away the culture. They took away the spirit. They took away the community that made cannabis so special. And now it's just another product being sold. So that makes me a little bit sad because I believe in the cannabis culture, not just the magazine and the company I run, but the actual global movement of people who identify with the plant. So it's an interesting dance, again, because when it's legal and there are events for the ordinary Canadians to go to, that's great. They're being introduced to something wonderful. But for the rest of us, the people who have been in the trenches, the people who have defended this plant and fought for it, it just doesn't feel quite the same. But if I had to make a decision whether to have legalized it or not in Canada, the way it is right now, I would accept this. I would accept where we are, and I am going to continue to advocate for change. But I am a little concerned that people are ignoring the problems, and the same model is being exported to countries around the world, and they're facing the same problems. We're seeing it all over, and I hope that the culture can survive the corportization of cannabis.
All right, you know what? We want to thank you so much for taking your time this evening, Jody, to share with us. And you have a wealth of knowledge. Personally,
Yes,
I think you speak of a future Trinidad and Tobago. To be quite honest, I don't know. I'm dead serious. The things that you say, the things that you mention. No, I talking about in the earlier when she made her intro and she spoke about the new corporate cannabis as opposed to those who have been there before. I think what I'm hearing is a lot of what is actually developing worldwide, meaning the traditional folks that have been there and believe that this is for them and they are going to benefit the most out of it have no idea what's about to come and it's going to blow straight over our heads. I think that is exactly what it is. Exactly the way you made it sound in Canada. I think that's what we're going to be facing here.
Of course.
Yes.
So defend the plant and defend the people, like stand up for our culture. And I hope I can visit in a few years and see a flourishing cannabis culture that's legal and profitable and helping the people of the country, not just the corporate powers of the country.
That is fantastic.
Well, definitely. I mean, Jody, you're always welcome to the Caribbean. I mean, anyway, in the Caribbean, we will try to facilitate you, and make sure your experience is utmost warm and best.
And of course, whenever we touch down in Canada, we have to make sure and give the Queen a call. We have to go check
I'm going to say, come to Vancouver, come to visit us and experience not just the beautiful city, but the roots of the cannabis legalization movement in Canada right here. Would love to have you and make things better for everybody.
When would you say is a perfect time for a traveler to make their way to Vancouver?
Oh, definitely now throughout the summer. If you like the rain, winter's great. But if you want to see a beautiful city, definitely the summertime. It's magnificent.
And when you say the summertime,
Canada's a pretty special place. It's a giant country. There's a lot to see, but Vancouver is like the California of Canada. We've got palm trees here even, so it's a very pretty place.
Last question on that note there. Let's talk temperature. You said it's summertime and it's pretty good now, but we know Canada is naturally cold.
Sure.
So talk to us. What kind of temperature are we looking at?
Oh, right now, Celsius, we're getting like 20-degree days for the springtime. In the summer, you get like 28. We do have heat waves. It got up to like near 40, but yeah, it's pretty unbearable. But if you do like the cold, I mean, our snowy winter season is beautiful too. I love that as well. It's part of being Canadian. And you get the nice contrast between the cold and the hot. It really makes you appreciate those beautiful sunny days, though, that's for sure.
All right, I like the sound of that. So thanks again for sharing with us here this evening on Heights, and hopefully we get to link up with you sometime in person. The queen of Canadian pot. Ladies and gentlemen, there she is. She's smiling away. Like the energy. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Jody. Take care.
Thank you so much.
All right.